Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and here we are once more, ready to jump right into the Eerie pool. And let's go to one of my. I'll tell you what. I'm going to go to one of my articles on Substack. This is an older article, but still, it's intriguing because what it's about is it's still out there. It's still how's this? It's still unexplained up to a certain point, and you'll see what I mean. Here we go. All right. This is titled Silhouette in the Sky. On April 26, 1986, the number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine experienced a lethal nuclear accident. Several explosions culminated in an open air reactor, releasing radioactive contamination for 9 days. The aftermath stories circulated of a flying humanoid figure with glowing red eyes seen days before the incident. The creature became known as the Blackbird of Chernobyl. It's described in some instances as being humanoid, other times as a headless torso with giant wings that measure approximately 20 feet across. Workers in the control room and power plant made it known to their superiors they had seen it weeks before the meltdown. In hindsight, many believe that its appearance was a portent of the coming disaster. Those who laid eyes upon it describe having horrific nightmares and receiving strange phone calls with only static on the other end. In 1997, Andrei Karasukov, a nuclear physicist from the University of Buffalo, visited Chernobyl to research a leak appearing to come from the containment chamber. He experienced an alarming incident that he described this way, quote, I got to the Chernobyl power plant early in the morning. I immediately went to the downed reactor sarcophagus, reactor 4, to assess the radiation levels and look for any potential leaks. I immediately overheard someone yelling for help and saying that there was a fire inside while I was taking radiation and rotogen readings by the entrance. I hurried upstairs to alert security or locate an official, but they stated there was no way anybody else could have been in the reactor control room as I was the first person to open that door in 3 years, at least living. The alarm would have gone off automatically if someone had broken into the reactor, and they would have been quickly let out. I heard what I heard even though the door had several authenticating security measures in place and hadn't been opened in years. Later that night, as we were dining close to the factory, the floodlights unexpectedly turned on. The only method to turn it on could be by physical switch manipulation, but the entire team was out to supper. We initially assumed it might have been a power surge, but just as we considered that the electricity returned, it seemed as though someone was paying attention to us and was responding appropriately. Chernobyl is home to something, and I don't think it's beneficial for anything. End quote. Pripyat, the nearby abandoned Chernobyl worker town, is believed to be haunted. People have had the feeling of being watched when walking past the city hospital. Apparitions and shadows are often seen. Some have even reported being touched. Before the disaster, 50,000 persons lived there, and within 24 hours they were evacuated. But who knows if any were left behind? The Pripyat amusement park was scheduled to open on May 1st, but since 1986 it has stood frozen in time. The Ferris wheel, the bumper cars, a boat swing were all left to disintegrate. It's been almost 40 years since the disaster, and wildlife in Florida appear to be thriving. However, there are still clues that this area was radiated. A study that was begun in 1991 found that organisms responsible for decomposition showed signs of contamination. Of these is what's been named the Bloody Red Forest, where all the pine trees turned bright red after the meltdown and then died, but did not decay. Chernobyl had about 14,000 residents before its evacuation. However, as the exclusion zone widened, more people were evacuated, including those from the nearby city of Pripyat. In total, 68,000 were resettled elsewhere. Many of these and first responders died due to radiation poisoning. After more than 35 years, first-hand witnesses are hard to find, especially those who claim they saw it flying among the black plumes of smoke coming from the plant after the explosion. In the aftermath of the meltdown, there was more than a 200% increase in birth defects and deformities in children. Of the 240,000 personnel who came to deal with the after effects of the disaster between 1986 to 1987, and they were dubbed the Chernobyl liquidators, 165,000 were left disabled and 60,000 died. There are three reactors that, although no longer operational, still need to be monitored since they contain nuclear fuel. About 3,000 workers come to the zone of alienation on a limited number of shifts per week, and the site is to be cleared by 2065. The question, though, still lingers as to what exactly was seen in those hours before the disaster. Some theorized the figure seen was a black stork. It's a rare bird, and with a wingspan of about 6 feet and a body type easily identified as avian, it would be difficult to confuse it with anything but what it is. Mothman. Some liken the story of the Blackbird of Chernobyl to the reports of Mothman, most famously linked with the disaster at Point Pleasant, West Virginia, when the Silver Bridge collapsed on December 15, 1967. The Point Pleasant incident is not the only one tied to weird sightings of a large winged creature. On September 10, 1978, in Freiburg, Germany, there was a collapse in the Black Forest mine. Early that morning, when the first workers arrived, they found a man standing at the entrance to the mine. He appeared to be wrapped in a long black trench coat. Several of them approached the figure, only to be horrified when what they thought was a coat turned out to be a pair of large wings that unfurled back from its back. Then it shrieked several times, sending the men running back to their companions who stood observing it. The figure then tucked its wings back in and continued to stand at the entrance. Despite the surreal experience, the miners started to prepare themselves for the day's work, keeping a wary eye on the creature. At 8 a.m., the ground shook beneath their feet and an explosion rocked the mine. They ran to the entrance where smoke and fire poured forth. The creature, who was later dubbed the Freiburg Shrieker, had disappeared. An investigation into the incident concluded that if not for the delay of the sighting, 36 miners would have been killed. Several months later, reports filtered out that less than 30% of the workers continued working at the mine, and others went on to suffer from mental afflictions, possibly connected to their encounter with the Freiburg Shrieker. Many were unable to return to work, dying young and in poverty, a similar fate shared by some who saw Mothman. There have been reports of a similar creature in Chicago since 2011. There was a resurgence in 2017. It's been seen along the coast of Lake Michigan and over O'Hare Airport as well. The descriptions are consistent with a winged bat-like or insect-like creature with a humanoid appearance. The eyes are ruby red, yellow, or reflective. Are these creatures, like the banshee, portents of doom? Are they perhaps there to serve as a warning which goes unrecognized? Or perhaps they are drawn to the violent energy that is soon to explode in a moment at a certain place in time? Perhaps they are only watchers. And now at Chernobyl, something is flaring up from an inaccessible basement room. Ukrainian scientists fear that a fission reaction has started reoccurring. Causes for the fission reaction is rainwater leakage, humidity, and radiation. This does not mean a second Chernobyl disaster could occur, but it could bring the shelter itself down since it is over 30 years old. There is no doubt that something still flickers in the buried uranium fuel masses. Will the Blackbird of Chernobyl return? So yes, I know that they have done different stuff. In other words, they've been tracking what's happening to everything. I mean, obviously, besides the people, but the environment and everything, just to track what happens. And like a lot of it is what they expected, that recovery from a nuclear meltdown is a very, very slow paced um, outcome. Or the way it evolves, okay, is very, in other words, we haven't gotten to the end of observing how long does it take for the effects of that meltdown to be complete, if it ever, if there is anything for that area to go back to what it was prior to the meltdown? I think that's a big question mark still. So something to think about. All right, let's go over to Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and this is titled Cold Cases Solved. And I like true crime, but I like cold cases. And again, I've spoken before about, thankfully, with DNA, some of these are cold, cold, cold cases. Cases that people thought were never going to get resolved, and they have been. So, anyway, here we go. In January 1980, Helene Brzezinski, 21, a young news intern, was found dead in a field in ranchlands off Daniels Park Road in Inglewood, Colorado. Her murder would go unsolved for close to 4 decades. Helen Brzezinski was a senior at Wheaton College and had started working at the radio station KHOW a little over 2 weeks before her death. The coroner determined she died of multiple stab wounds to the back, and she was sexually assaulted several times. Her hands were bound behind her back, and she was naked from the waist down. Helene would normally take a bus to her home in Inglewood, and from there walk to her uncle and aunt's home where she was staying. Police suspected this is where the killer abducted her. Investigators believe there was a link between Brzezinski's murder and two other slayings in the Denver metropolitan area, but it would be many years before they could connect the dots as to who the perpetrator was. The police said the crime resembled one in 1968 and the other in 1970. 3 weeks before Helen's murder, a woman was raped in the same area. Another woman reported that a man attempted to grab her as she was getting off the bus. In May 1994, authorities were looking at Kenyon Battles Tollerton as a suspect. Police believed he was responsible for the death of Sissy Foster, 14, whose partially clad body was found in September 1993 in a remote area of Denver. Like Brzezinski, she had been stabbed various times and raped. In 1976, Tollerton tried to abduct Janelle Shepard from a mall's parking lot by hiding in the back seat of her car. By the way, I gotta interject. I think that it's every woman's worst nightmare is that somebody in the back seat thing, but let's continue. Only an intervention by a good Samaritan saved Shepard, and he was arrested. It was believed she was his only victim to survive. For this crime, he was placed on probation. It was a suspect in the murder of Holly Andrews, 16. I'm sorry, he was a suspect in the murder of Holly Andrews, 16, who disappeared on December 26, 1976, after leaving her mother's home in Littleton. Her body was found the next day in Bakersfield, Colorado. He was suspected in other stabbing deaths of teenage girls in Colorado. In 1980, Donna Wogg's half-clad body was found in a field in Arapahoe County. It was already decomposing. She lived in an apartment across an alley from where Tollerton lived. He became a suspect and was charged with first-degree murder for the rape and strangulation of the 22-year-old waitress. He pled guilty to second-degree murder in 1981. The prosecutors were seeking the death penalty if it was taken to trial. He served a 10-year sentence for this crime. Prior to this, Tollerton had been sentenced to 10 years in Leavenworth federal prison for a federal conviction on 2 gun possession charges. The DA sought the maximum 24-year sentence, saying that based on Tollerton's criminal history, he was dangerous. Judge Ken Stewart said there was no absolute proof of Tollerton's guilt and sentenced him only with 10 years. He was paroled in 1991. Within 2 years, he killed Sissy Foster. Police arrested him when they found a link between DNA taken from Foster's body and a blood sample taken from Tollerton when he was serving a sentence in prison in 1980. In 1994, he was sentenced to life plus 48 years for the murder of Sissy Foster. By 1999, authorities once more tried to match sparse DNA taken from Brzezinski's murder scene. So far, tests have been inconclusive, but there was hope that with new advances and an expanded DNA database, there would be a match to her attacker. It wasn't until 2019 that a match was made between semen taken from the crime scene to James Curtis Clanton, formerly known as Curtis Allen White, of Lake Butler, Florida. He was convicted in 1975 of raping a woman at knife point inside her Arkansas home. He forced the woman to drive him to a bus stop in Little Rock and then released her. She went to the police and he was arrested within the hour. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison with 10 years suspended sentence and was released on parole after just 4 years to live in the suburban Denver home of a former counselor who offered to help him. It was then he killed Helen Brzezinski. Yeah. At the time of his arrest, he worked as a truck driver. And after being surveilled for a week, in other words, at the time of his last arrest, this is when he's much older. At the time of his arrest, he worked as a truck driver. And after being surveilled for a week, he was arrested and extradited to Colorado. The match to Clanton was made via genetic links to family members who submitted DNA. Then the police were tasked with getting a DNA sample from Clanton and finally obtained it from a beer mug he was seen using at a bar. Only Janet Johnson, Helene's sister, was left alive from the immediate family to welcome the news of the arrest. In 2020, Clanton, 63, pled guilty to a first-degree murder charge, with a plea resulting in the dismissal of 3 other counts of murder and a kidnapping charge. He was sentenced to life in prison, and he would be eligible for parole after serving 20 years. He told investigators that after meeting with his parole officer, he decided to take a woman to have sex with. He said he saw Brzezinski get off the bus, abducted, raped, and killed her. He was 22 at the time and had moved to Colorado only a year before the murder. He worked as a landscaper and lived only blocks from the bus stop. From the bus stop Brzezinski would use to get home. Clanton looked very similar to a sketch produced in 1980, from a hypnotized witness's description to a booking photo of Clanton in 1998. And for those of you watching the video version of this, if you look at that picture, this actual photograph and the sketch made from the hypnotized witness, they're very very close, but he had a very average look. There was, I want to say, if not thousands, millions of guys in their 20s that look very similar to that. Big mustache, the shaggy kind of little bit hair. And I would say, which I'm surprised he didn't do it, which he might have done it, is all he would have had to do is go get a haircut and shave off his mustache, and he would have looked completely different. But how's this? He had a very typical look. It looked like him. Don't get me wrong. It looked like him. But God, very average looking, good looking, but average looking guy. So as far as getting somebody, well, better than nothing, I guess. Anyway, Clanton was not charged with sexual assault since the statute of limitations had expired. However, there are suspicions that he was behind a series of reported attacks in the area around that time. A family friend of Clanton said he knew him well and that Clanton was guarded about his past and lied as to the reason why he had gone to prison in Arkansas. The story he told was that he got into a fistfight over a girl, kicked the man in the chest, and unintentionally killed him. This same friend said that Clanton lived a quiet life and was not known to be violent. In 1998 and 2001, Clanton was arrested on domestic violence charges. There was a delay in actually arresting Clanton since the initial possible match through a genealogy website exposed a convoluted family tree. Police had to wade through 3,000 family members in order to narrow their focus. His mother used 6 different last names over her lifetime and had 5 children with 2 different men. Early in his life, Clanton used the name Curtis Allen White and lived with his father as an infant but was raised by an aunt and uncle until he was 13 years old. He was a chronic runaway and ended up in foster care. He would tell authorities he didn't know who his mother was and said his uncle was his father. He started using the name James Curtis Clanton in 1982. Clanton's brother had a lengthy criminal history, and at some point police had to make sure he was not the one they were looking for. As per prison records, Clanton remains incarcerated at Bent County Correctional Facility in Las Animas, Colorado. He will be eligible for parole in January 2040. So much heartbreak could have been avoided if Clanton and Tullerton would have been sentenced appropriately and served their entire term behind bars. One wonders if whoever decided to parole either of these men ever slept soundly after this terrible decision. DNA gives answers, but on occasion leaves more questions than before. In June 2021, a cold case dating back to 1956 was solved, but left lingering doubts if there were other victims that have never been found. The place is Sunray, Montana. In 1956, three boys were hiking on a cold January day when they came across the body of a young man, face down with his hands tied behind his back with his white suede belt. He had been shot in the temple. The body was next to a car which was in gear with the emergency brake, ignition, and lights on and radio on. Money and a camera were not taken, so police ruled out robbery as a motive. The next day, a county road worker found the body of a young woman at the bottom of a 20-foot embankment along Vineyard Road, north of Great Falls. This was 7 miles from where the young man's body was found. She had also been shot in the head but sodomized and raped as well. They were Lloyd Dwayne Bogle, 18, and Patricia Joyce Kalitsky, 16, who had been dating for several months. Bogle was an airman stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, originally from Texas, and Kalitsky was a junior at Great Falls High School. They were killed at a known lover's lane. There was no struggle around the bodies, leading police to believe they might have known the person who attacked them. Initially, they considered the crime was the handiwork of a jealous suitor. They were killed with a .45 caliber gun, and neither shells or bullets were found at the scene of the bodies. Investigators, not only from the local police department, but with Malmstrom Air Force Base, followed many leads, but the case eventually went cold. The police could find no motive for the crime. Not even a false confession was made. Unsolved Murders magazine offered a $10,000 reward in addition to an existing $5,500 local reward for any information. The crime would go on to be reenacted on hard copy in 1989. Throughout the years, the Cascade County Sheriff's Office continued to work on solving the crime. Luckily, during Patricia Kalitsky's autopsy in 1956, a vaginal swab was taken and preserved on a microscopic slide. In 2001, the swab was sent for testing and found to have sperm that did not belong to Bogle. In 2012, Detective Sergeant John Cadner was assigned to the cold case and he turned to forensic testing. In 2019, Cadner hoped a clue could be found through a genealogical match. The DNA recovered from Patricia Kalitsky's body led to a man named Kenneth Gould, who had lived with his wife and children in the Great Falls area around the time of the murder. In 1967, he moved to Missouri with his family. Gould died in 2007 and his body was cremated. His family provided DNA that confirmed he was the murderer of the young couple. In turn, the families of Bogle and Kalitsky were told of the outcome to a 60-year-old mystery. Kenneth Frazier Gould, at the time of the murder, lived only a mile from Kalitsky, and he worked with horses only blocks from where she lived in Great Falls. He was known to ride his horse extensively in the area. Only a month after the murder, Gould sold his property and moved to Tracy, a small town southeast of Great Falls. Then in July, he moved again to the tiny town of Geraldine and lived there from 1958 to 1967. The family left to Hamilton and then to Alton, Missouri in 1967. They never returned to Montana. Gould had no known criminal history before or after the murders. When approached by law enforcement with the DNA evidence, none of his family admitted to knowing of any criminal behavior on his part. Kenneth Gould was born in 1927 to Royal Gould and Ruby Cartwright. His father died unexpectedly in January 1929 while his mother was pregnant with his brother Glenn. His mother was briefly married to Joseph Daschle, and in 1933 she married Gail Tucker. In 1938, his brother Glenn, who was 9, died in a fire that destroyed the ranch house near Belt Park where he was vacationing. Oil exploded in the stove and burned him over the majority of his body. When Gould was 15 years old, he was staying with his maternal grandparents, Frazier and Blanche Cartwright. One day he just disappeared after leaving to bring cows to a nearby pasture. The family searched for him, but neither him or his black and white pinto pony could be found. There were no tracks left either. His grandmother grew so desperate she published an ad in the local newspaper trying to find him. 10 days later he was located, happily working for George Cesarek on the Arrow Creek Ranch, which was 60 miles away. He had ridden his pony there, and he didn't return to his grandparents' ranch for 6 months. As Kenneth Gould aged, he was arrested a couple of times for reckless driving and minor accidents, but nothing significant. On May 24, 1952, he married Lulu Bell Brown. He would live with his wife and children on different ranches in the area depending on who hired him. In April 1956, only 3 months after Bogle and Kalitsky were killed, he moved with his family to the ranch run by Chris Moline. In January 1960, his daughter Janet Marie, age 4, died from an illness. She was one of 5 siblings: Roy, King, Catherine, and Crystal. This was almost 4 years to the date the young couple were killed. During this time, the case was being investigated by the local police department, but Gould had not fallen under suspicion or even questioned about the crime. In 1970, his younger half-brother Russell Tucker died in a motorcycle accident at the age of 34. By then, Kenneth Gould had moved with his family to Missouri. Kenneth Gould lived and died in obscurity. He passed when he was 79 years old without any record of aberrant behavior. He only had a great aunt, Eva McNutt, who died in 1932 after being committed to an insane asylum for several years. Was the murder of the couple an impulsive crime, or had he somehow become obsessed with Patricia Kalitsky and stalked her? The question begs to be asked. Were they his only victims? And by the way, that's a very good question. It's true. This guy was, how's this? I'm gonna play the devil's advocate on this. If he ever did anything, he was never caught. How's that? And part of me thinks that it's very difficult to think that someone that's a normie, when I say normie, like, goes one day and kills two young, they're teenagers, 18 and 16, kills them, shoots him in the head, and does that. Uh, to me, the feeling I get is that this guy did maybe other things, whether it was murder or not, and was just never caught. And the truth was, Montana is sparsely populated in certain areas. He grew up there. He knew all the places to go, not to go, you know, and there's never any mention, which by the way, that's another thing. The match of the DNA and the crime. So in other words, was there any other cases now that they've ever looked? They don't mention, hey, we're going to go and look back around those years at any cold cases and see if this was, maybe this is why it was cold. They didn't make any mention as if the local police department would do something along those lines. That you would think, okay, just because this guy had never come under suspicion, was never questioned, in other words, everybody was way out there in left field on this. Like I said, I find that so hard to believe that you one day wake up and you go and kill two people like the way he did. So, but that's the thing. He passed away and everybody's gone. So, let's stay on the true crime thing. And sometimes it's not a lack of it's not a lack of suspects. It's sometimes you have too many. Anyway, this is titled Without Apparent Reason. It was a week before Halloween 1966 when a family was found tied up, gagged, and slain in their home in the suburbs of Tallahassee. More than 5 decades have passed and the case remains unsolved. Date October 22nd, 1966, where Tallahassee, Florida. Robert W. Sims, 42, was an official for the Florida Department of Education. On a Saturday night, like most Americans, he was at home with his wife Helen and his 12-year-old daughter Joy Lynn. He had just returned the day before from a trip to Washington, D.C. An older daughter, Nora, aka Nora Jeanette, but nicknamed Jenny, arrived home after a babysitting job just before midnight to a house that was quiet, too quiet. Like her sisters, they usually came through the carport to enter the house. She found it was unlocked, which was out of the norm. Only the television was on. She called out for her family and finally made her way to the master bedroom, where she found all three of them dead or dying. Their hands were tied behind their backs and they were blindfolded. Robert was on the bed, gagged and shot once in the head. He died before reaching the hospital. Helen was on the floor, also gagged and shot twice in the head and once in the leg. She would die 9 days later from her injuries. Joy was shot once in the head, had 7 stab wounds in the chest and abdomen. She was the only one that was not gagged or blindfolded. The severity of her wounds was unusual since, of all three victims, she would be the least problematic. She had been painting at the dining room table earlier that night. Sims was dressed in pants and undershirt. His wife was fully clothed, and Joy was in her nightgown. They were all barefoot. The attacker was believed to have used a 38 caliber pistol. Women's stockings, neckties, and part of a woman's slip were used to bind the victims and socks to gag them. Around 10:45 p.m., a neighbor heard high-pitched screams, but they thought it was children. No one else in the area heard anything. Early on, a straight crime expert, Ed Yarborough, theorized that a sex pervert had committed the crime. In his opinion, this was, quote, the work of a sexually deranged person, a sex maniac. There are many types of perverts. There do not have to be signs of sexual molestation, end quote. Sheriff Joyce, with the local police department, disagreed, since neither Helen Sims or her daughter had been sexually assaulted. He told newspapers, "We have questioned everyone who could give us the slightest information. We have eliminated several possible suspects. We don't have enough to arrest anyone, but we are talking to everyone from disgruntled employees to known perverts." Initially, the detectives denied any sexual element against other against other either female. Okay, I'm sorry. Initially, the detectives denied any sexual element against either female. Later, however, certain off-the-record comments suggested otherwise, where it pertained to Joy. Her panties were pulled down, her shirt was pulled up, and she had bloody handprints and bruises between her legs. She'd been beaten. It was obvious at that point to investigators the girl was the target of the break-in. Some would argue the stabbing of Joy had a sexual component, and she had a bruise on her right cheek made by a ring. The assailant was left-handed. The police could not find a motive for the murder. Mr. Sims had been working at his job as a director of data processing for close to 10 years. He was a U.S. Army veteran, and he was highly respected by his coworkers and neighbors. Helen Sims was a part-time secretary to the associate minister of the Baptist church they attended. She had resigned a few days before. It seemed the main pastor, Dr. Roberts, had a reputation as a womanizer. Whether this had anything to do with Mrs. Sims resigning her post is unknown. However, the pastor had a good alibi for the time the murder was committed. Helen Sims died on Halloween, and the populace in Tallahassee, which numbered about 80,000, were so scared that no children went trick-or-treating that year. In the days that followed, Tallahassee hardware stores reported that in a few hours they had run out of nearly 100 locks and chains. The Sims Brick Ranch house at 641 Muriel Court sat on a cul-de-sac. Behind it was a wooded area. It was a neighborhood populated by high echelon state and university career people. There was no sign of forced entry, and afterward it remained sealed and only open to detectives who were searching for clues. This would lead detectives to believe the family knew the assailant, but perhaps it was just a knock at the door which Sims answered, never imagining he had just allowed his murderer to enter freely into his home. This could also explain how a 6 foot 4 inch athletic man in the prime of life could be subdued. Perhaps he faced an assailant that pointed a gun to his face once he opened the door, or perhaps it was someone he didn't feel threatened by. Like a woman, for instance. The family kept a shotgun in a closet, which was never used. There was no evidence of anything being robbed. After the murder, the Sims' other two daughters, Jenny 16 and Judith Ann 15, were sent to the care of their grandparents. Judy, who had also been babysitting, was spared the horror of what her sister found inside their home. After Jenny found her family in the bedroom, she stumbled to the kitchen to use the phone. This is when she noticed the front door was open. She could remember seeing it this way when she arrived. Later, this was to figure in the theory that whoever attacked the family had still been inside the home when she arrived. Authorities found that intricate knots and bindings had been used on the family. This did not appear to be a haphazard attack, but something planned and thought out. Gags had been stuck deep into the mouth of the victim, which probably were suffocating them slowly. The methodology was reminiscent of the 1946 film The Killers, based on a story by Ernest Hemingway. where the murderers used household items. Truman Capote's true crime story in cold blood had been recently published. It detailed the 1959 murder of the Clutter family, which has similarities to this crime. As the investigation progressed, it was found that all the items used to tie up the family had been taken directly from where they were at, as if the person knew ahead of time where to look. There had been no riffling of drawers or closets. It was almost eerie how undisturbed the house was. Around 10:45 p.m., a girl babysitting in a house situated behind the Sims property heard what she thought was screaming. She checked on the child she was caring for but found everything was okay. Later, she heard screaming again, shots, and bursts of light caused by gunfire. Another neighbor behind the Sims heard 5 gunshots, then all went quiet. 2 blocks away on Gibbs Drive, a scream was heard. Later, investigators learned that a young man from the neighborhood, described as slender, tall, about 21 years old, with glasses, was seen walking away from Muriel Court around 11:15 p.m. He gave conflicting information as to where he was before and after the time the murders were committed, and what he was doing. Another witness said they heard someone running through the woods that came up behind the yard of the house on Muriel Court. An account described a white car by the junior high, which a neighbor thought was suspicious when it sped away towards Gibb Drive. There was a ravine that started at the Sims property, where beyond it someone could have left some type of transportation. There was also a trail that led to the Styles Pond. The white car would later be tied to suspects of the crime. Certain areas behind the Sims house showed where someone had cut back foliage in order to have a better view of the house. The position was hidden, but would give a direct line of sight of the Sims house. Over 1,000 fingerprints were processed, and sadly most of them belonged to law enforcement. It appeared the police had not kept the scene secure. The day after the murder, cars and gawkers came to the house. Tallahassee had not experienced a murder of this type before. The police were unsuccessful in recovering the firearm or knife used in the murder. They dragged the nearby Styles Pond in hopes of finding either one, but nothing came of the effort. The family was buried at Hebron Baptist Church Cemetery in Mississippi, and the 2 surviving daughters were adopted by their maternal aunt, Jo Carr. The houses on the street remained impossible to sell for years after the murder, and until this date, the case remains unsolved. In a 2017 podcast interview, former state prosecutor Jeremy Mutz described pertinent facts about the case, including suspects. The young couple who were questioned by police was Vernon Britton Fox Jr., 21, and his fiancée Mary Charles LaJoie, 19. His father was Dr. Vernon Britton Fox, who chaired the criminology department at Florida State University. He had been a deputy warden of Michigan State Prison at Jackson from 1949 to 1952 and negotiated the 1952 inmate strike of what was then the nation's largest prison. The couple were inseparable and were often seen together in the neighborhood. They had known each other since elementary school. People saw them at night walking in the neighborhood and hiding behind trees. The parents of each of them did not approve of the relationship. Fox had joined the Air Force and was kicked out 4 months later due to mental health issues. Strangely, prior to his departure, there had been an uptick of calls to the police about prowlers. They died away and resumed when he returned home in 1966. Was there any connection? When the police spoke to them about their whereabouts and activity the nights of the murders, they each provided the other's alibi, which at times became contradictory or changed from interview to interview. LaJoie missed classes the Monday after the murders. Once Mary LaJoie admitted to investigators she had gone to the front door of the Sims home on the night of the murder. However, she never said she had gone inside. She went on to draw a diagram of the interior of the house, which some would think would be impossible for someone unless they had been inside. The layout could not be guessed by someone standing on the outside. LaJoie also appeared to have a troubled psyche. She was nicknamed Morticia. She was fascinated with funeral homes and was caught going into some of them to see bodies. She was equally attracted to autopsies. Due to her strangeness, she could not find any girl who wanted to share a dorm room with her. In 1967, she wrote a paper about this case titled The Sims Murder Theory and presented it to her English class. The motives she gave for the crime were 1. Sex, 2. Revenge, 3. Anger. She wrote that she felt sex was the motive, and the little girl being the target. She wanted to describe to her teacher that she wanted to have sex with the blood of fresh bodies, and that she carried a small knife about a 3 or 4 inch blade. She was born left-handed but was made to use her right hand, making her ambidextrous. In April 1960, Fox gave LaJoy an engagement ring which might have caused the wound on Joy's cheek. Later was ascertained she had learned how to tie specialized knots and bindings via time spent as a Girl Scout. Also, her father was a rigger and electrician for the FSU circus. There she learned to tie different knots used in circus tents. The day after the murder, LaJoy rode her bike to the murder house and approached police outside. She asked, "How is Mrs. Sims getting along?" She went to the sheriff's on more than one occasion and asked, "Do you think I could have done this and not remembered?" It seemed she was concerned Mrs. Sims would recover from her injuries and be able to identify who killed their husband and daughter. According to Mutz, it seemed Dr. Fox, who was well connected, made phone calls, and his message was clear: either arrest my son or stop questioning him. LaJoy and Fox went on to marry and then divorce. At various times, they spoke to law enforcement or posted content on the internet to tease about the possibility they were the culprits. After 1987, LaJoy spoke one last time to law enforcement and faded from commenting any further on the crime. Vernon Fox Jr. was interviewed by a documentary crew at FSU in 2016 and also made statements on the internet. He claimed that he still loved LaJoy but feared for his life because of her tendency toward mental illness and physical violence. He posited that because she had failed to get alimony payments extended, she had suddenly gone to the police to try to implicate him in the murders. Some of his online posts have been removed. During the time of the Sims murder, there were rumors that Fox was suspected of mutilating ponies in a farm north of town. There was also whispers the couples did things to animals during the time they would skulk in the woods. Now, these are the other suspects. The first notice of the murders came at 1 a.m. on October 18th, when an anonymous man, who remains unidentified 56 years later, called the Tallahassee Police Department and reported that he had seen two bodies at Blue Sink. This was almost a year to the date the Sims had been killed. The mutilated bodies of Florida K. Granger and Elizabeth Ann Wood, both 17, were found in a lonely lover's lane. Both had been shot, stabbed, and bludgeoned near Blue Sink, a few miles south of Tallahassee. Robert Scott Sanders, 21, was arrested and charged. He was tried separately for each murder and found to be insane, even though it was found he had killed Wood because she was a witness. He shot her, which only resulted in a flesh wound. After this, he stabbed her over 60 times and beat her with a tire iron. Sanders was a California native who had gone AWOL from Fort Benning, Georgia, and drifted down to Tallahassee. As of October 19, 1966, days before the Sims murder, he was living at Helms' rooming house located at 123 North Adams Street. He stayed there until January 1967. He worked at Mannheimer's service station on West Tennessee Street and coincidentally received his paycheck on October 22, 1966. 5 months later, he was returned to the Army as a deserter after being stopped for speeding. 2 days after arriving at the base, he escaped when he volunteered to give blood. He returned to Tallahassee. Despite efforts to connect him with the Sims murder, there was not enough evidence. He was acquitted of the girls' murders on the grounds of insanity, and he was committed to the state hospital at Chattahoochee. The indictment on the Sims case was left pending based on a disagreement on the motive in the murder. Every 6 months, Sanders' case was reviewed since he was being kept at the hospital based on diagnosis of psychosis. In July 1973, state psychiatrists testified that Sanders was sane, but that he could be dangerous if provoked. Such a condition apparently was not treatable, and under the state's new Bill of Rights for mental patients, inmates which cannot be treated are entitled to be released subject to action by the hearing examiner. After being kept at the state hospital for 7 years, the attending psychiatrist, who was the director of the hospital, Albert E. Fulton, decided that Sanders was mentally stable enough to be released under what was defined as convalescent release. Sanders was released to a halfway house where he participated in a work release program in Pensacola. One has to wonder if part of the reason he was released only years after murdering two teenage girls was the controversy occurring at the state mental hospital. Around 1970, there were 6,000 patients, and in 1972, 4,300, with only 2,500 employees to attend them. They were underpaid and overworked, with the average pay for the employees being about $372 per month. It was argued that attendants caring for the criminally insane were in danger of bodily harm because they were often left alone with groups of patients. Country editor Will Ramsey proposed what was known as the Mosquito Creek Code, which was a rule which gave the attendant the right to get him back, quote unquote, get him back. Even though a notice was filed with the Leon Circuit Court clerk dated June 17, 1974, to ensure that the judge handling the Sanders case would be notified if he returned to Florida, he never was. Sanders was found working as an armed security guard at a motel in a high crime rate district and carrying a pistol borrowed from his girlfriend. State Attorney Harry Morrison sent Sanders back to the mental asylum. On the heels of returning Sanders to the hospital, Dr. Peter B. Ivory and Dr. Albert Fulton were indicted by a grand jury on conspiracy charges that they pressured Dr. Harold W. Conman, a staff member, not to testify on the sanity of Robert Scott Sanders. Dr. Conman was asked to determine if Sanders was still dangerous after his return to the hospital. At a deposition, Conran said that his supervisors called him an adversary and feared he would make the institution a laughingstock by finding that Sanders was a danger to the public. In August 1975, charges were dismissed against both doctors. 2 years later, in April 1976, Sanders was released and given a plane ticket to Alaska, where his mother lived in Ketchikan. After this, he disappeared from history and Florida. Dr. Fulton died in 1989 after serving as director at the hospital for 4 years. Florida state prosecutors had been critical of premature release of the so-called criminally insane, such as the case of Cherry Ann Cooley Niziolek, who killed one daughter, Pamela, age 7, and attempted to murder a second daughter, Patricia, 9, by giving them massive doses of antidepressant and soft drinks. She also tried to kill herself. She and her older daughter were discovered in time to have their stomachs pumped and their lives saved. Like Sanders, Cherry Ann Niziolek was found not guilty due to insanity. In December 1972, Dr. Fulton declared she was competent and no longer a danger to herself or society, and was ready for release. This was only 90 days after she had been committed. What became of Sherry Cooley is unknown. Her daughter Patricia Niziolek died in 1998 at the age of 53. She had been released to the care of her maternal grandmother after her mother tried to kill her. Now, back to the Sims case. And one of the other suspects in the case was Pastor Cecil Albert Roberts, who was involved in an affair with a 25-year-old divorcee. He was known to have young women coming and going into his office. However, a womanizer does not a murderer make. He was the chaplain for the football team and was seen on film that night during the FSU versus Mississippi U, giving him a solid alibi of his whereabouts the night of the murder. There were rumors that Reverend Roberts and Sims had words and that Sims threatened to minister the afternoon of the slayings. The probing into his life prompted him to step down as pastor within months of the murders. It led to 2 heart attacks, and he shortly left town and ended up in Texas. Roberts was killed years later in a traffic accident. Other suspect, Thomas Arthur Fulgham, grew up in Tallahassee and lived close to the Sims family on Mary Beth Avenue. He was 15 years old and had just started ninth grade. In 1979, the Tallahassee Police Department interviewed him due to a crime he committed many years after the murder on Muriel Court. In October 1979, he was found guilty of malice murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. He killed Dale Perney, a woman he had known for a short time. He was found standing outside the apartment complex where she lived, holding a quart jar covered in blood. Inside the jar was one of Perney's internal organs. He asked for an ambulance and said something bad happened. He had also severed a finger from his left hand. Police followed a trail of blood to an apartment with a broken sliding glass door. Perney was in the bedroom. All her organs from her windpipe to her genital area had been removed. A 12-inch butcher knife had staked her to the floor through her naked upper torso. Other internal organs were found in the bathtub and others on the floor of the living room and kitchen. A plate of food was left less than a foot from Pierney's head. 2 days later, Fulgham's finger was found. An autopsy found that she had received 44 separate stab wounds which caused her death. Dale Pierney had moved into an apartment, E207, at the Ski Lodge apartment at 5540 Roswell Road Northwest 4 days before. She had separated from her husband and moved from Tennessee. Pierney and Fulgham had met a few days before at a group session of former narcotics users trying to kick their drug habits. According to the Fulton Police Department, Pierney did not drink but attended AA meetings. She did not take drugs, her father said, but she attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings, and she had a lot of religious literature lying around. Fulgham had recently spent 14 months in a Florida asylum and just walked away. His parents confirmed he had a history of institutionalization and had been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. Prior to Pierney's murder, he had been hospitalized 3 times due to psychotic episodes. He was a Navy veteran of the Vietnam War. As a younger man, Fulgham returned home from a religious meeting and choked a close relative by the throat, saying he wanted to shake the devil out of him. According to his court-appointed attorney, Fulgham had attempted suicide 4 times out of reasons of religiosity. The last time he jumped out of a speeding car. Later, Fulgham told the doctor that Pierney's face had turned into Satan and that she was possessed by him. Unless certain organs in her body were removed, Satan would return to earth. His left hand was also evil, and God told him to cut off his finger in order to scar himself as proof of his battle with Satan. The jar he carried was a trophy. Fulgham was diagnosed as a chronic paranoid schizophrenic who suffered delusional compulsions triggered by religious stimuli. His disease was incurable. His family and other friends testified he had been normal until 1975 when he became obsessed with religion. Despite the gruesomeness of Fulgham's crime, there was no torture or anger aspect to it, unlike what happened to Joyce Sims. Neither of the Sims daughters reported ever seeing Tommy Fulgham watching them. After he was honorably discharged from the Navy, his girlfriend traveled cross country with him, and he never mentioned anything about the Sims family. Fulgham died December 1996. In early 2016, a task force was assembled between different Florida law enforcement agencies to share information and theories in order to solve the cold case. For some unknown reason, within a few months, it was dissolved. Makes you wonder, right? One has to wonder if there was not some occult connection to the murder. It occurred 1 week before Halloween. Samhain is regarded as the witches' Sabbath, the equivalent of their New Year's Eve. Some theorize the crime was committed on that Saturday night because of the distraction offered by the football game, but perhaps there were other reasons for the timing. The following weekend, on the 29th, there would have been a full moon. And if you're planning a murder at night, the last thing you need is illumination after dark in order to be seen better. If timing was not important, why not wait until another day when Dr. Sims would not have been at the home? A physically fit man would have been a significant impediment, unless waiting would spoil the intent of what could be interpreted as the sacrifice of a virgin. Perhaps there was occult symbology left at the crime scene that the police force did not know how to recognize for what it was. There's always hope the Sims family will get justice. Like the case of Irene Gaza, who was murdered in 1960, her case remained unsolved until 2016 when an ex-priest was convicted of her murder. So what do you think? Nice area, nice people. Obviously the main target was this girl, right? And that that thing about the timing, I would say before Halloween, but something that did make sense was Dr. Sims. He was a 6'4" guy. This is a big man. In other words, if you're planning to get in there and do something, you would wait. I don't want to have to fight this guy. Even if you have a gun, even if the person had a firearm, I don't want to deal with this guy. And apparently he had just come back from a trip, so somebody could have waited. He's not here. I mean, if the target was the girl, believe me, there would have been better options not to encounter her father. And that to me speaks of that it had to be around that time. The timing there was something important to the timing. And then of course around it you have all these crazy people that like Fulgham, that he was 15 and lived in the neighborhood, but again, they don't think he had anything to do with it because, in other words, he was really, really crazy. These two, these LaJoy and the other ones, there's something there. I think I have a feeling that, and basically, this Dr. Fox, he told the police leave my son alone, but I think he just didn't want to deal with that. In other words, his dad, it sounded like neither family, but I think his dad didn't want him to hang out with married Charles LaJoy. That they were married eventually, but then even after they get divorced, he's saying how he's kind of scared of her. So, and there was a theory, I believe, um, that LaJoy, for some reason, she was almost jealous in a way of this young girl Sims. I don't know, some weird stuff. But yeah, that whole thing, and it's surprising that after so many years, it is still remains a cold case. Incredible, but true. Now, next story is I mean, if we're gonna go to dark true crime, let's stay with dark true crime, shall we? It's pretty dark out there. I mean, this is titled out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. It's titled A Hunger for Mayhem. In October 1931, a strange discovery was made about 2 miles east of Pasco County near the Snake River Bridge. It was of a tor- of a, the it was the torso of a woman nailed to a telegraph pole. This is Washington State. The body appeared to have been staked to the post in the sagebrush at least a couple of weeks before. The spot was at the confluence of the Columbia and Snake Rivers, which were dragged for any clues. The gruesome human remnants were found by H.R. Olson and A.R. Welch and his wife. The local authorities were stumped since there were no reports of a missing woman in the area. Based on the remnants of flesh still left, Dr. O'Brien from Pasco County said the woman had a fair complexion with auburn hair and she was between 30 to 40 years of age. The deputies from Franklin County searched the area for the rest of the body, but nothing was found. They asked for help from a Seattle criminologist, Luke May, who was sent pieces of the flesh. 3 days later, the mystery appeared to be solved. A caretaker at the cemetery reported that a particular grave had been disturbed. The body of Permelia Canus, 76, had been exhumed from the cemetery. She was buried on September 25, 1931. The casket had been split open. Fingerprint experts from Walla Walla Penitentiary worked on the case. An elderly man, Isaac Brooks, also aka Isaac Samuel, age 81, with a prison record, was picked up for questioning. Mrs. Canus had kept house for him for several years. He had lived in Pasco County for about 10 years after serving a stretch in Walla Walla prison. Isaac Brooks had a story all his own, and with good reason he was a suspect. In 1913, he was arrested in connection to the murder of John Murphy, a camp cook. The man's fiendishly mutilated body was found in a shed in the stockyard in North Yakima. Bloodhounds owned by former jailer J. O. Hahn twice followed a trail from where the body was found to the back door of Brooks' shack in the southwest part of the city. This was 2 blocks from where Murphy died. Murphy was 65 years old and worked as a camp cook about the valley for several years. Due to his wounds, he had bled to death. Also arrested was a man named Jimmy Burns, Thomas Corbin, and J. H. Tim, all of them laborers. A few months before Murphy's murder, James Burns was assaulted in the same manner, in the same part of town. It led the residents to the town to believe there was an insane person at large, whose mania drove them to this form of mutilation. On December 19th, James Fitzgerald, alias Jimmy Burns, was found working in an industrial camp near Pasco and brought back by Sheriff Joe Metzger. His testimony was said to have completed the chain of evidence against Isaac Brooks. Due to his confession, authorities went searching for L.K. Fullerton, a county prisoner who in November said that Brooks made a similar attack on him. His story and the fact that a bloody mattress was found in the Brooks house led credence to his words. In March 1914, Isaac Brooks was found guilty of maiming workman James Fitzgerald. The prosecutors decided to charge him with the attack against Fitzgerald, who was described as a boy, and not the murder of Murphy, in which they had only circumstantial evidence, even though they were the same quote unquote fiendish character. He was charged with mayhem, which was a specific and serious charge. It sprang from the word maim. However, the charge could only be applied when a victim lost a limb, the loss of a sense, was left disfigured, or had life altering changes to the body. Mayhem is usually the deliberate and intentional infliction of grave and severe bodily harm. What saved Fitzgerald was that he was found before he bled to death. However, Murphy had crawled into a shanty and died there. Fitzgerald positively identified Brooks as his assailant. The defense team tried to discredit Fitzgerald by saying he had once been a glass eater with a circus. Brooks, who was an older man, had lived in the area for many years, while the two victims were laborers who had been in the city but a few days when the inhuman crimes were committed. Though never clearly stated, it was inferred that Brooks mutilated them by cutting off their genitals. James Burns, like the other men, seemed to live the life of a transient. In May 1913, he, along with Thomas Hardy, had just arrived in Bellingham, Washington, when they were arrested for stealing about 100 pounds of copper wire and fittings from a building. Men with no family or homes were the ones targeted by Isaac Brooks. In May 1914, Brooks, who was 58 years old, was sentenced for an unusual crime and was ordered to spend 2 to 10 years at Walla Walla. It seemed the compulsion that had driven Brooks to attack at least two men was not extinguished during his prison term, and as to why he decided to punish Permelia Canusa's corpse remains a mystery. Isaac Brooks was released for insufficient evidence after being arrested for mutilating Permelia Canusa's corpse. He died in 1943 at the age of 93. So, in other words, since it was a corpse, I guess it was pretty horrific. And then one has to think this lady kept house for him for 10 years. I wonder how many times he came close to doing something to her. And maybe she up and died on him before he got a chance. And he was like, I'm going to have the last word. I'm going to dig up her body and stake her torso. He dismembered her and stake her torso to a telegraph pole. That's a very, very disturbed individual. All right. Next story is out of AP and is titled "The Long Lost Ancient Roman Artifact Reappears in a New Orleans Backyard." A New Orleans family cleaning up their overgrown backyard made an extremely unusual find. Under the weeds was a mysterious marble tablet with Latin characters that included the phrase "spirits of the dead." The fact that it was in Latin, that really just gave us pause, right? Said Daniela Santoro, a Tulane University anthropologist. I mean, you see something like that and you say, okay, this is not an ordinary thing. Intrigued and slightly alarmed, Santoro reached out to her classical archaeologist colleague Susan Lusnia, who quickly realized that the slab was the 1900-year-old grave marker of a Roman sailor named Sextus Congenius Verus. When I first saw the image that Danielle sent me, it really did send a shiver up my spine because I was just floored, Lusnia said. Further sleuthing by Lusnia revealed the tablet had been missing from an Italian museum for decades. Sextus Congenius Verus had died at age 42 of unknown causes, after serving for more than 2 decades in the Imperial Navy on a ship named for the Greco-Roman god of medicine, Asclepius. The gravestone calls the sailor well deserving, and was commissioned by two people described as his heirs, who were likely shipmates since Roman military could not be married at the time, Lusnia said. The tablet had been in an ancient cemetery of around 20 graves of military personnel, found in the 1860 in Civitavecchia, a seaside in northwest Italy about 30 miles from Rome. Its text had been recorded in 1910 and included in a catalog of Latin inscriptions which noted the tablet's whereabouts were unknown. The tablet was later documented at the National Archaeological Museum in Civitavecchia prior to World War II, but the museum had been pretty much destroyed during Allied bombing and took several decades to rebuild, Lusnia said. Museum staff confirmed to Lusnia the tablet had been missing for decades. Its recorded measurements, 1 square foot and 1 inch thick, matched the size of the tablet found in Santoro's backyard. You can't have better DNA than that, Lusnia said. She said the FBI is in talks with Italian authorities to repatriate the tablet. An FBI spokesperson said the agency could not respond to requests for comment during the government shutdown. A final twist to the story suggests how the tablet made its way to New Orleans. As media reports of the find began circulating this week, Erin Scott O'Brien says her ex-husband called her and told her to watch the news. She immediately recognized the hunk of marble, which she had always seen as a cool-ass piece of art they had used as a garden decoration and then forgot about it before selling the home to Santoro in 2018. None of us knew what it was, O'Brien said. We were watching the video, just like in shock. O'Brien said she received a tablet from her grandparents, an Italian woman and a New Orleans native who was stationed in the country during World War II. Perhaps no one would be more thrilled by the tablet's rediscovery than Sextus himself. Grave markers were important in Roman culture to uphold legacies, even of everyday citizens, Lusnia said. Now Sextus Congenius versus or Verus is being talked about so much. Lusnia said, if there's an afterlife and he's in it and he knows, he's very happy because this is what a Roman wants, to be remembered forever. Interesting, huh? I'm telling you, some of these lost artifacts, museum pieces, things like that, they end up in the weirdest places. Like, what I mean weird, like unusual, like one of those. Okay, next story out of Stars and Stripes Europe. And this is titled The Ghost Liberated by the U.S. Army. USAG Bavaria installations in Grafenwohr and Vilseck have a ghostly neighbor who haunts the dark rural roads and abandoned mines around the village of Freihung, called the Weiss Frau. I don't know if it's Weiss or Weiss Frau. The Weiss Frau, or the White Lady. This ghostly apparition joins a cohort of white ladies that are popular in German supernatural tales, like the White Lady of Freihung. Freihung, I don't have to pronounce that age. Most dramatic white lady figures are not considered dangerous, and they are scary, appearing out of nowhere to wander the worlds of the living. Some sources believe that Weissfrau stories across German-speaking regions are a cultural relic from former pagan beliefs in elven spirits or ancestral guardians. Many of the White Lady legends have over time taken on specific histories, often evolving to represent the unrestful spirit of noble women from the Middle Ages who met tragic ends, such is the case at Freihung. In the 12th century, lead deposits were found in the region and mining operations began, eventually digging a network of shafts and tunnels used until 1945. During the Middle Ages, a noble family oversaw the peasants, who toiled all day in mines, and Freihung grew as a prosperous mining village around their manor house. Legends say that the White Lady who haunts Freihung is a noble woman from that manor. In the past, she would appear in the dark tunnels, beckoning miners to follow her and get lost in the underground blackness. Her appearance became a harbinger of danger, perhaps a warning, perhaps a phantom guide leading people to their death. Some of the tunnels she haunted were directly below the village. Many were still used into modern times, like those underneath the Outpost Inn. The inn sits in the center of Freyung, at the same location of the former medieval manor house, where the White Lady presumably lived and perhaps died. Eventually, the modern owners of the inn grew tired of being spooked by the White Lady and wanted both her and the haunted tunnels gone. Supposedly in the 1970s, a demolition team from the nearby USAG Bavaria Grafenwohr trainings area was called in to safely destroy the tunnels. It's unclear why American soldiers were chosen for the job instead of local German authorities. Some have speculated that it made for an interesting, if not bizarre, training opportunity for the Army. The hope was to rid the town and the inn of its ghostly resident, but it did not work. Nowadays, the wispy figure of a white lady still spotted around Freyung. However, she's no longer limited to tempting people who venture underground. She's often seen wandering down dark nighttime roads, shocking drivers who think they spot her in the rearview mirror, only to glance again and see nothing. Other cars have swerved around what appears to be a woman in the road who cannot be found afterward. Sometimes people hear a disembodied female voice outside the village at night, or feel an icy touch while walking along trails beyond their houses in the evening. Is it possible that the army helped to release die Weissfrau of Freihung from her confinement in the old mine tunnels? Perhaps instead she is wandering in the night air looking for the soldiers who destroyed her underground refuge. Who knows, right? That's a pretty neat story. Yes, that white lady thing. That's like, that's very common, like sighting, especially of these like castles and things like that. But anyway, I will be back with you soon because I got plenty of weird and unusual stories to entertain you with. Till next time.